to talk about the quick menu. The main menu, very slow to get around and find stuff. It's just very slow. A lot of times in the video, when we're in video mode and we hit the Q button, we can get to things much quicker. So the first thing is the focus and focus method. So you got your flexi zone single, you've got your live mode, which is basically face detect, and you got your quick focus. I love quick focus. We're going to be talking about focus in much greater detail later. So moving down, we've got our drive mode. This really doesn't matter. You can change it. Most of the time what we're going to be using drive mode for is when we set white balance, custom white balance. And I usually leave it on single because I don't want to be like creating a whole bunch of shots where I really don't need to. So I usually just leave it there. Next one down, raw, really doesn't matter. I usually shoot raw all the time anyway. Sometimes when I shoot sports, I shoot JPEG, but most of the time it's raw. And so I usually just leave it on there, and either will work fine when you're setting custom white balance, which we'll get to later. All right, next one, let's see, we'll step through all of these really quick. Is our resolution for a video. So 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second, all I, compression. Next one is, again, on the lower number, they're saying that the highest number, the 1920, but it's mostly commonly referred to as 1080. So this is 1080, 30 frames, IPB. Times out very quickly. 1080, 24, all I. 1080, 24, IPB. And then here we go again. You know, they use that number at the bottom here, the 1280 by 720. This is commonly referred to as 720. And what's great about this is I use this a lot when I do want to do slow motion. And so at 60 frames per second, we're not going to really get into post-processing and what happens in the editing part of this video. But when you bring it into your nonlinear editor, you can take that 60 frames and bring it down to like 24 frames per second. And it makes really fluid slow motion, which is awesome. Next one up is 60 frames IPB. And then when you get to this this 480 resolution, which I never use. Why did you buy this camera when it shoots so awesome HD video when you would go all the way down to 480? No idea. Audio recording level. We don't really have an opportunity to go automatic gain or manual gain. We're going to get to that when we get to the main menu. But what we've got here is we can actually choose with the jog wheel. Let's go back. And then with the jog wheel, we can actually, you can see the meters going up as I talk. But typically what I'll do if I'm using the internal microphone, I'll usually leave it right about here, right between these two. And that's an okay compromise. And then what you can do in your nonlinear editor is bring that volume up if it's too low. Because if you go more than that, it gets really noisy. And that's kind of a good compromise because you can do some audio noise reduction inside your nonlinear editor and you can clean it up a bit. And that's what I found to be kind of the acceptable level over the years. Now what I do when I'm using this microphone, for instance, right now, which is plugged into a different camera, what I'll do is I'll bring this all the way down. Now if you go all the way down, it turns it off. So I go one click above. And so basically I'm not using any of that preamplification inside the camera. I'm making the microphone do most of the work because this microphone is really hot, as we've talked about before. It has a 20 dB boost compared to most microphones. And then when I've used like the wireless microphone, the same situation where I've put it on the hot shoe and gone right into the camera. No juice link, no Beach Tech, no external cables to deal with. It goes right into the camera and it works quite well when you have it set there. And then you bring your nonlinear editor, you bring it, you normalize the audio, and it's really clean. So I really recommend buying those. Either of those two mics works quite well. So to step to the next part, we go down and it'll step up here. And this is our white balance. So let's go all the way to, so AWB stands for automatic white balance. We're gonna have a whole entire chapter on this. So I'm not gonna spend much time on it, but you got daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, custom. And so custom, when we do set up our custom, after you've set it and you've set it to memory, what that is, what white is, we're going to talk about later, but you need to go in here and actually select it for your automatic, or it's not going to do anything. So we're going to talk about that more later. And then Calvin, here, if I press the info button and then I take the jog wheel, I can then change the color temperature of the Kelvin. Again, we'll be talking more about, I just wanted to show you actually how it's done, how you select it. So to get back, I'll hit the set button. And the next one down is our picture style. I'm going to have a whole chapter on this. The first one's auto, don't recommend it. Standard, don't recommend either. Portrait, I don't like. Landscape, a little too saturated. Neutral, I do like, and I'll explain why later. Faithful, it's okay. If you want to shoot black and white, I don't know why. I'd rather shoot in color and then convert it black and white later. Then you got your 3 custom ones. You can actually put picture styles in here. And here on the first one, I've put in a very flat picture style called Cine Style. And we'll demonstrate this later. So that's how you get to change the different picture styles. So moving down, we've got an auto lighting optimizer. So if you hit the, you can actually disable this in M or B modes, which M is manual and B is the bulb mode. And we are actually in M mode. So you can actually, if you don't want to bump this, for instance, which I've done, you can hit the info button. It puts the check marks in it and it disables it. So when you try to actually change it, you can't. So if you hit the info button again, you actually can go from off to like high. We're gonna be demonstrating this later, but basically, we'll demonstrate this in the picture style area, but basically what it can do for you is bring out some of the shadows, especially when you're in like a higher contrast situation, or somebody, let's say, is in a shadow and you want to get more light on them. I'd actually advise against this, because what it'll do is bring up the shadows a little bit when, let's say, somebody's back in a shadow, or somebody has wearing a hat, for instance, and you can't see their face as well. It'll bring up their face a bit, which is good, but just you should light better. And don't use it as a crutch, because what'll happen is when you start pushing the ISOs, it gets very noisy when you're on the auto lighting optimizer. So I suggest leaving it off altogether. Try to light better, bring in a reflector, whatever you need to do to bring up those shadows. So we'll demonstrate that more later. And the next one is the video snapshot. Gosh, you can set it to off or disable. Again, like I said before, I'm not going to really cover this because editing within the camera just is a silly idea, if you ask me. I see really no reason to ever use that. So that is pretty much all of the quick menu. All right, before we get into the other menus, the main menu area, I want to clear up some confusion you guys might already be having. I want to tell you, like on the Rebel line of cameras, like a Canon T4i, T3i, T2i, and the T5i that's coming out, they do a really good job at segregating the two stills and video in terms of the menus, which is awesome. So, for instance, you could make a change in the menu when you're shooting a video. Change, you've made a change, and then you go over to the still side and nothing has changed, which is awesome. For me, I like to keep things separate. Unfortunately, with the 5D Mark III and the 6D, they've done it in a very different way, and the menu items are intertwined. Let me give you an example. Auto lighting optimizer, like kind of what we've talked about just recently. So if I'm in manual mode, and let's go to stills mode. And then I hit the menu button, auto lighting optimizer, I can go to, I'm going to set it to strong. So now when I go to video mode, hit menu, you'll notice that it's still on strong. So they cross over. On the Rebel line of cameras, this does not happen. So if you've owned a Rebel line and you're stepping up, there's going to be a little bit of confusion here. So let me give you another example of how this can be very confusing, especially the way they have it laid out. So let's say you want to, let's go back to stills mode and hit the menu button. And we'll go down to, see where it says color space, sRGB? Well, you've got two choices. We're going to change it to Adobe RGB. Now this is where it gets very confusing. So now I'm going to go back to video mode. Now I'm going to go to menu, and you're going to see color space, Adobe RGB. So you're thinking to yourself, oh, All right, I'm in Adobe RGB. I got a bigger, wider gamut of color space, whatever, you know. I like that color space better than RGB or whatever you're talking about. So let me demonstrate. What's going to happen here is, let's go back, and I'm going to hit record, and then I'm going to stop record. I'm going to hit play, and then I hit info, and then what do we see right here? It says sRGB. Even though I set it to Adobe RGB on the still side, which seemed to reflect on the video side, but whoa, wait a minute, it says sRGB. So there's a lot of confusion there. For the most part, everything that you set from like picture styles are intermeshed between the two, stills and video. This is one of those instances it does not, is this particular one. Like contrast, sharpness, all that stuff will get reflected between the two. So you just got to keep that in mind. But things like Adobe RGB, sRGB does not. So there's definitely some confusion. One of the things I'll recommend to you, because you own one of these cameras, probably because you want to take awesome video and awesome stills, what I do is when I shoot pictures, is I'll rotate this to the mode dial to AV. So when I'm shooting pictures and I go to picture mode, let's say I set the aperture to something nice and even. We'll set it to 10, for instance. And then when I go back to manual mode, you'll notice that it's at f4.5. So when I go to video mode, it's also at f4.5. Now what's nice about this is, let's say we have got it set to a 50th of a second, and we're shooting, which we'll get into more about later, why we're shooting at 50th of a second. But then when I go to AV mode and I flip this over to stills, you'll notice that it's at a 20th of a second right now. Depending on your aperture, obviously, it's going to change all over the place. So I don't usually shoot stills in manual mode. I shoot it in AV mode. So then when I'm going back and forth, at least the shutter speed will remain segregated between the two, video and stills. So hope that'll clear up some of the confusion. All right, one more item before we go into the main menu area, and that is, I want to talk about the term baked in, because I'm going to probably be using this a bit as we go through the menu. When I say baked in, basically what I've learned over the years is when you shoot JPEGs, so if I go to here and I say I want to shoot JPEG, and we'll put this over here. So now I'm shooting JPEG large on my still side. Well, what happens when you do that? All of the things that pass through the digic processor, like picture styles, color tone, sharpness, a lot of different things, contrast, all get baked into the image. And you're basically telling the camera, hey, I don't know what exactly I'm doing here. Why don't you just handle it for me? Just give me a nice, pretty picture. So when you're going, let's go back to here, and if I set this to not JPEG and I set this to RAW, now what we're telling the camera when we're shooting stills is, hey, I got it. I'm going to take care of all the saturation, the sharpness, the contrast, and all that stuff later. Give me a very flat image that I can work with. So what's happened when you're shooting a movie, the movie is also passing through that digic processor, and a lot of things are getting baked in, like picture styles, contrast, sharpness, all that stuff. Like when you're making cookies, chocolate chip cookies, you put the sugar and the flour and the morsels and stuff, and you mix them all together, and then you throw them in the oven, and then you bake it. And then when you take the cookie out, you can't go back later and separate out the flour, for instance, or the sugar, or you can't pull those things. You can't even find them. They're all meshed together. That's very similar to what's happening to when you're shooting movies, is all those items like contrast are all being baked in, which is a real important concept to get. So where we have a lot of flexibility on the RAW side, we don't have it on the video side. And on the video side, we want to give ourselves as much flexibility as we can later. And we're going to be going through that in the picture style chapter in quite detail. But the point I'm trying to get across to you guys is when we're shooting a video, we don't have a lot of choices in post. So what we want to do is give ourselves the most latitude or options to actually do this stuff in post. A good thing to demonstrate this is, for instance, if you're used to Lightroom and you shoot stills in RAW, you can go back and change the picture style later. You can go in and say, oh, I want it to be neutral, or oh, I want to be landscape, and you can actually choose that later. Well, when you shoot JPEG, you don't have that choice. And it's very similar to movie. You don't have that choice. You can't go back later and say, oh, I want to lower the contrast. Or I want to change the picture style. You're stuck with it. So, all right, that's pretty much that term baked in. So when I say that, hopefully you guys will know what I'm talking about. All right, now we're finally on to the red menu. Starting at the very top is image quality. It really doesn't make a difference what you shoot at. You know, like when we're setting custom white balance, really doesn't matter, so we'll skip that. Beep, you can enable or disable this. This is for mostly photography related items, but I mean, if you are setting white balance, you don't want to be that noisy. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. Maybe if you're a wedding photographer, you might want to turn off the beep. Let me demonstrate really quick. And there's a very slight little beep. I don't even know if you heard it, but the shutter itself is so noisy. Well, actually the 60 is quieter than some of the other cameras I've used, but it's still a lot noisier than the actual beep. So if we go back to the menu real quick and we disable this and we do the same thing to go in. So we didn't have anything, we just heard that shutter going dirt, 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 dirt. So you could turn it on, or you know, I just leave it on because it really doesn't make that much noise. So I'll enable that. Release shutter without card. This is more of a photography related item, because what they do usually when you want to buy a camera in the store, they don't have cards in them, so you can release the shutter without the card. So if let me turn the camera off really quick, pull the card out, turn it back on, and it says no card in camera. But let's say you don't see that message and you go to take a picture. It just says no card in camera. But you can actually preview it because it's coming off the buffer. But if you go ahead and disable, and I go to take a picture, it won't let me. So it's saying, hey, you have no card, don't even bother trying if you don't see that message. And on the video side, if I try to take a video, it won't let me do anything either. So I like having that, you know, just in case like there's a lot of sun glare on the LCD and I can't see it very well, and I can't see the message, for instance. So I just disable that. Next one down is image review. Let's say if I take a picture, 1001, 1002, and boom, it's gone. You know, it's just personal preference. I just hold it. So I like the chimp. This is both on the photography side. It's not on the video side. This has nothing to do with the video, because you can, let's say if I go take a video, hit record and I hit stop, does it preview it? No, it just keeps you in video mode so you can hit record again. So really an option only on the photography side. All right, moving to the second page of the red menu, we have lens aberration correction. And the first one is peripheral illumination correct, and you can enable or disable it. And to understand what that is, here's a very good example on the still side. This is a still I shot of just a kind of a blank, white foam core. And you'll notice that there's some vignetting around the edges. And I'm not using any sort of algorithm, and it's disabled in the camera right now, but boom. In Lightroom, I'm talking about Lightroom here just for a second, you'll notice that Lightroom cleaned it up quite well. Well, the algorithm that's inside the camera can also do this, but it doesn't do as good of a job as Lightroom does on the still side. And so on the video side, let me demonstrate of using the algorithm within the camera, not in Lightroom, but in the camera. Let me show you this example. So here is it disabled in the camera, and what you want to look at around in the corners, then boom, there it is enabled, and gosh, I can't tell any difference at all between the two. On this particular lens, shot at f4. Maybe you need a Canon lens for this able to work. And if you have a kind of a cruddy Canon lens, maybe an older one that has a lot of vignetting, you know, when it's shooting wide open, this could help. But with this kit lens, the 24-105, I'm just not seeing much of anything. You can leave it on. because you really don't sacrifice anything in noise, because here is an example of with it's enabled on the left and disabled on the right, and I'm shooting this at ISO 3200, and I don't see any noise difference between the two. So you're not like degrading the image if you turn it on. I have had situations where I've shot at extremely high ISOs. The 3200 is pretty high. I've shot at 6400 on the in the stills mode, and then Lightroom would bring it up those corners a little bit too much, and then that noise gets just even more amplified, especially on like when you're doing astrophotography and stuff like that. You might want to leave it off. But on the video side, I'm not seeing it at all. So you could either leave it on or leave it off for videos. I prefer just leaving it on unless I know I'm going to be shooting in a real super high ISO environment. All right, next one down is chromatic aberration. You can either enable it or disable it. And let me show you some examples. So here is it with it disabled, chromatic aberration correction video mode, and then here is it with it enabled. Didn't see that much of a difference. And if if you don't know what chromatic aberration is, basically, especially when you look at this one where I've zoomed in way into that center chart, basically you will see like if you have lines or tree branches or something, and you zoom way in, you can get some sort of like purple fringing that you'll see on very discrete lines. And here, this particular lens is so good, the 24-105, I'm not seeing any, but you can see as I play the video, you can see there's little noise in some of the lines, and I don't see any. They both have, some of them have a little bit of a color shift between those where it shouldn't be. And then here, look at, this is on the still side. We just watched a video, but now this is on the an actual photograph of it enabled versus disabled. And again, I'm not really seeing much of a difference here. But if you have an older lens that has a lot of chromatic aberration, you see a lot of purple fringing, you can definitely leave it on. One of the things I did test for too is noise at ISO 3200. And again, I'm not seeing any noise difference between the two to cause any problems. So you could pretty much leave it on all the time if you like. All right, next one up is mirror lockup. This one really has nothing to do with us. The only thing I can think of is maybe if you're cleaning your sensor, which is well beyond the scope of this beginning level course. So we'll go ahead and skip that. Exposure compensation. On the video side of things, we really don't have to worry about this unless you're shooting an AV or TV, which again, I don't recommend doing. You could bring the overall exposure down like 2 or 3 stops or whatever you want to do. But again, I would just not doing that. All right, next one is ISO speed settings. Top one, you can just set the actual ISO number. I don't recommend doing it this way because we have a dedicated button on the top because it's so hard to get to. So I would just stay away from that. And then ISO speed range. This is more on the photography side because I know there's like bird photographers that are trying to capture a bird in flight and they want to keep to a certain shutter speed. But they want to have the ISO go up or down, and they say, well, but I don't want to go higher than ISO 800, which will help their shutter speed if they have it on auto ISO. So you could do that, but on our side, video side, I can't really ever think of a reason to change the range for us shooting video. So I would just leave it as wide as this is wide open from 100 to all the way up. So I would just leave it there. All right, next up is auto lighting optimizer. So you can set this from like off. Different ranges are low, standard, and high. I'm going to show you some examples between disabled and high. So just to kind of explain what it is, it's basically kind of helps fill in the shadow. So if you have somebody like is in the shadow and the camera's not exposing properly and you don't have access to better lighting equipment or reflector or something to light them a little bit better, you can turn auto lighting optimizer up a little bit and it'll help fill in the shadows. So in my case, here's an example. Here I am just standing, I see I've got a hat on, so it's creating somewhat of a shadow. Even though I'm in a really high key environment, I've got snow on the ground and the clouds. It's very soft light, but it's a high key environment. But also, I mean, just watch, here, let me just demonstrate. So here is with the strong, and pay attention to the right below the hat. And then you'll see here is it disabled. So you'll notice that there's more light on the left side. You see it's strong, on the right it's disabled, and you'll see that it fills in more of the shadows basically. So do I recommend leaving it on or off? Before I used to say definitely leave it off because it would create noise, but have a look at this. Here's the strong at 3200 ISO, and here is it disabled at 3200 ISO, and here's comparing the two close in. And to be honest, you're going to see a little bit of exposure change between the two, but I gotta say, maybe a little bit, ever so slightly. Auto lighting optimizer on strong creates a little bit of noise, but boy, it's not much. I would suggest personally just leaving it off all the time, and then basically what you should do is just light better. So if you want to help fill in the shadows, I would do it that way. So going back to the camera here, there's a if you hit the info button, you can actually disable this in the M or B mode. So the manual or bulb modes, you can actually just not even have it do anything. So we've kind of talked about before already. White balance. We've kind of discussed this already, but you can go through and step all the different ones. You could even choose Kelvin. And if you do, then you can rotate the wheel and you can actually change the Kelvin from here, which we've kind of demonstrated before on the quick menu side. But you can do it from here as well. I don't know why you'd ever want to come this deep into the menu to do it. You'd much quicker to do it with the quick menu. So if we back out, if we go down to custom white balance, now here I just want to demonstrate this to you really quick. So what we can do is we can take a digital calibration target. You could use anything that's basically white or gray. You want to stay away from like white paper, which sometimes has a little bit of blue in it they make it a little bit brighter just using paper. These you can buy these in much smaller, different sizes, and you can buy just the gray part, and that's which all I really need. And Canon recommends that you actually use an 18% gray versus white. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to stick this in front of the camera. And let's go ahead and we need to get the exposure somewhat close. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to go to the photography mode, and I can just see my meter here. And then let's bring it up here, take a picture. Okay. So you don't have to totally fill the frame. You only have to actually get just the center portion of the frame. It's really small, like kind of the area where all of the focus points are. You don't have to get the whole entire frame filled. It's basically, if you know where the spot metering is, about that size. It doesn't have to be very big at all. So what you do is you go back to menu, you go to custom white balance. It says only compatible images displayed. Now, if you're using black and white, that's not compatible. So it won't work with a black and white photo. Just so you know, I've tried that and I'm like, why doesn't it work? So what you want to do is go ahead and hit that, and it'll use the custom white balance data from this image for custom white balance. You say okay, and then you say okay again. Now you're halfway there. You've set into memory. You'd actually delete the photo if you want, but what you can do here is let's go back to movie mode. And we'll hit the quick menu, and then we'll just jog backwards until we get to custom. Hit select, and then boom, we are set, and we're ready to go with that particular white balance. Another really quick thing is you want the gray card to point towards the camera. You don't want to, like I have a softbox right here. You don't want to point the gray card towards the softbox. You want to point it towards the camera. You'll get much accurate, at least I've found. You get an accurate data from the custom white balance that way. All right, moving on. Custom white balance shift. So here's an opportunity if you're one of those people that are used to dialing in the Kelvin and you want it a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler type of look, you can dial it to your personal taste. But let's say you are using these white fluorescent lights and they have a little bit of green shift to them. Well, you can get rid of some of that green shift by just going into custom white balance shift and just shifting it down towards magenta, which is pulling greens out of the image, and then just hit set. That's one way to do it. I personally never use that way. I usually just do custom white balance, so I know I got a deadly accurate representation of the color. One reason that you can use this is if, let's say, you're doing a certain look and you want to bake it into the camera. Well, then let's say you want a really blue image, you'll just scooch it all the way over to blue. Let's say you're doing some sort of scene and it's, you know, twilight or something like that, and you want it to make it look like it's moonlight or something like that. So you could shift it all the way over to blue, and then when you get into post, you can shift it to blue even further. Or let's say you want to make it the morning sunrise even warmer. You could just send it all the way over to amber on the red side. Would be one particular use for it. Again, to be honest, I usually don't do that. I'd leave it right in the center, try to get it very accurate, and then try to do everything in post later. Color space. I think like we've talked about before, you only have one choice here, and that's sRGB. Adobe RGB is more for on the still side because we just can't do anything in that color space for video. So let's just move on. Picture styles. We're going to have a whole entire chapter on this, but really quick, you can just basically cursor up and down, pick the picture style you want. I'm particularly, right now I'm using neutral. And then these symbols, which are always hard to memorize, let me step through them. If you have to hit the info button, it says detail set. I have the sharpness turned all the way down. We'll discuss that later. Contrast all the way down, saturation down 1 notch, and color tone I leave in the center. And I'm going to be a whole entire video on how this all works later. But this is one way you can go in and change all those values. All right, let's go back. Long exposure noise reduction. This is only on the still side. So if you're doing like astrophotography and you're doing a time lapse, you can definitely do that. I will warn you that the time it takes to process the image, it can be extremely long. Could be like 20 seconds before it finishes. So if you're doing time lapse over and over, you might want to save that process until you're in your like Lightroom or something like that, and you can add noise reduction at that point. Because if you want your shutter to stay open for 30 seconds and you're getting the stars, and then you want it to close and then wait a couple seconds right from the buffer to the card, and then boom, it opens up again. You can't really do that if you have this long exposure on, because it'll take forever. High ISO noise reduction. Here's an example of ISO 100. This is our cleanest ISO. And here it is with no noise reduction. And here it is with noise reduction turned on. And again, this I can see no difference. And this only, it doesn't say in the manual, but this only might be applying to ISOs greater than 1600. But it works wonderful. Like here is 12,800 with noise reduction. And here it is without noise reduction. And you can see it does a lot of good. I just leave it on all the time. It doesn't hurt your images at ISO 100. So this is a video related item. I would just leave it on all the time because it works wonderful. It really cleans up the image quite well. If you know anything about post-processing and trying to add image noise reduction later in post, it can be a very time-consuming and CPU-intensive type task to do. So if you can do it in camera, man, do it in camera and clean it up there, because this is one time that the algorithm inside the camera works really good. All right, next one up is highlight tone priority. So you can set this from off to a +D. And when you hit +D, you'll actually see that. Let's go back. And right down here, right next to the ISO, you'll see where my finger is. It says D+. And what this does is, here, let me demonstrate what it doesn't do first. So you can explain. See, I can only go down to ISO 200. I can't reach 100. So basically what it does, it kind of shifts everything in the brightness and darkness kind of spectrum. It kind of redraws the curve. And basically what it does is it kind of shifts everything so it can create a little bit of a roll-off in the high end, the brights. And to demonstrate this, the best way I can do is just demonstrate it. So here it was snowing the other day in April. Here is with off, and you're gonna see when it goes to on, it looks a little bit brighter, but what it's doing is it's protecting the highlights, not all of them. And when I did this, I purposely exposed it a little bit overexposed. I looked at the histogram and I could see it was going off a little bit off to the chart, so I was losing some data. But the point I was trying to make here is look at the the back of the camera. We're going to get into blinkies in a while, but basically the area that's blinking, you've lost all detail on this. This is video, and here is where I've turn the highlight tone priority on, and you'll see less of it is blinking. It's not saving all of the highlights. It's protecting some of them by gently rolling off the highlights. So it protects some of them. It doesn't protect all of them. That's the main point I want to get here. So if you look at them side by side, you'll notice that the highlight tone priority on kind of lightens the exposure a little bit. It's shot at the same lens, same exact everything. And to be honest, I usually leave this off. I don't usually turn it on. In terms of noise, this is again 3200 ISO. One on the left is with no highlight tone priority, and on the one on the right is with the highlight priority turned on. And you'll notice that gosh, I can't really tell a difference between the two. But so if you're in a situation you really need to protect some of those highlights, you have a lot of clouds, you might want to try using it. I personally rather not use it because you get to these deep menu items, it really is easy to forget that you've left it on, and then all of a sudden you're trying to get to ISO 100 and you can't get there. And then you got to go into the menu and change it, and then you can go change ISO to 100 again. So this one I usually pretty much leave off all the time. All right, the next menu item down is dust delete data. This is more on the photography side. I've never used this, to be honest, but from my understanding is you can actually map where the dust particles are on your sensor, and you have certain programs you can use on the still side that will bring this information and know where those dust particles in and clean it up somehow. We don't have any of this on the movie side, so this doesn't pertain to us at all. Stepping to the next one, we've got autofocus method. We kind of talked about this already on the quick menu side, but you can select between the different ones, and we'll get to focus more in detail later. Next one is silent live view shoot. This is more on the still side. And metering timer. I usually leave this on about 10 minutes, maybe in 30 minutes. Here, let's change it to 30 minutes. And what this does is, actually to demonstrate this, let's put it to 4 seconds so I can demonstrate this better. So right down here is basically your light meter for exposure. So in this case, you could see I'm about 1 and I don't know, a third stop down, but you'll see that tick mark went away after 4 seconds. And that can be very nerve-wracking to have that go away and then have to press the shutter again halfway to have it come back up again, because it's an awesome tool, especially in video mode. So what we're going to do is I just change that to 30, and then therefore when I got it there, it won't drop off after 4 seconds or 8 seconds. It'll just keep going. So as you're going around with your exposure, you can see what's happening in there and it doesn't disappear, which is kind of nice to have. And the next one is grid display. So you can change this to a lot of different methods or grids. I usually leave it on 3x3 for the rule of thirds. And it only works, unfortunately, there's no way to change this, but you can see the grids right here. Which is great for composition. But when you hit record button, the grid disappears. I wish there was some way to keep that on. So I prefer leaving it in the 3x3. You could change it to just about anything you want. But recording size, we've already kind of covered all these in the quick menu area. Sound recording, you can set this to auto. So you're basically telling the camera you want it to take care of the gain. So if somebody's talking really loud in front of your camera, it'll clamp down on it. Or if there's music playing, it'll basically push the gain down. And then when somebody doesn't talk, and it's usually very fast, it's like it's probably around a half second what I've measured, boom, it pulls it back up again. So you can have this really what's called pumping and breathing sound, and it's just not a really good way to set your audio. I would say not set it on auto. My personal preference. I know some people like still motion. If you guys know who those people are, they'd leave it on auto, as a scratch track. when they're doing dual sync sound. And if you're only doing single sound where you're recording it to the camera and that's all you're using, I would really recommend using it on manual. So just go down here, select the manual. And then the record level, again, we kind of talked about this already, but basically what I'd do is if you're using the internal mic, I keep it around right where it is right now. But if you're using very hot microphones, bring it all the way down, just one click up, and you'll get some really nice clean audio. Let's go back. And then you got your wind filter. You can enable or disable this. I personally usually don't do anything with this because basically it just creates a high pass filter, so it cuts off some of the low frequencies, like probably around 100 hertz. So any of that wind noise that's really pushing the diaphragm hard and creating a lot of distortion on your microphone, you can get rid of that. But you should probably just do it in your nonlinear editor rather than doing it here, because then you're going to forget about that you've left it on. Attenuator, I don't want to make any attenuations on here at all. I want to get as much gain as I can out of the preamp at its very lowest setting. So I keep that disabled. All right, next one down is timecode. This is really an advanced topic for a beginning level course, but let me kind of give you just kind of a rundown of what things do, and I'll give you my take on it. Count up, you've got choice between free run and record time. So first off, if you don't know what timecode is, this is basically it'll handle SMPTE timecode within the camera. And so basically you can get not just the hours, the minutes, and the seconds, you can get frames as well. So this becomes a really good tool for syncing things up in post, whether it be two cameras. Let's say you're doing a music video and you've got three cameras and you're running them all at the same time. Well, you want, like when the drummer hits that snare drum and you maybe have two cameras, you want them to hit at the same point while you're doing your editing so things don't get off beat and stuff like that. Or you might have a 2-camera or a 3-camera shoot in an interview where you're cutting between different cameras and you want the person's mouth to be in sync with the audio. So you want to sync up all the different cameras. There's lots of different methods and ways to do this. There's software like Pluralize, which I've used, or you can sync it up manually by like snapping your fingers and seeing that very transient peak on the two different audio tracks and then lining them up in your nonlinear editor, so then everything tracks perfectly after that point. To be honest with you, that's what I do most of the time if it's just a 2-camera shoot and I only have just a few takes. But if I have like tons of takes and it's an interview and we're going over things over and over and we're starting and stopping cameras, then I'll use Pluralize, because it'll take that tedious task of matching them up. For if I have like 40 or 50 clips, it just goes and does it for you extremely fast, which is an awesome tool. So you've got the manual way, you've got with the audio peak, you got Pluralize, or you can use timecode. And I've experimented around with this. To be honest, I've never used timecode since back in my college days. And basically, when I experimented around with this, because the 5D Mark III, which I'm filming with right here, has timecode, and this one, the 6D, has timecode as well. Now, what you can do with these two cameras is you can, and I've tried to do this, here I'll show you. So we'll go to timecode, and you can set the start time, and you can manually set it. So I've set the time to what I want it to be on both cameras, and then I hit OK at the exact same time. Well, you can't get them exactly matched. The closest I could get was about 4 frames difference, and that's enough to put you a little bit out of sync, especially if you're watching somebody hit a snare drum. 4 frames, when the snare drum could be up here versus the other camera, it's going to be on the drum itself. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go back. So let's go back. So we got count up. We've got record run, and we've got free run. A lot of times you just see most people use free run, and basically what that is basically just the time of day, a 24-hour type clock, which is great when you're syncing things up and you know exactly the time of day that you sync things up and you can find things quicker. Or you could do record runs, basically resets it to 0 each time. I would recommend free run. And then you've got your start time setting, which I've talked about before in terms you can manually input it, which I tried to do for both cameras, which does not work. You can reset it. or you can set it to the camera time, which in this case the 60 does have Wi-Fi and you can get it pretty close. But the other, if you have multiple 60s, maybe that approach would work. I kind of doubt it. It'll get you into the perfect frame match. Again, this is kind of an advanced topic, but stepping down, we got movie record count. You can set that to timecode or record time, so you can actually see the time of day. It won't display the frames. It'll say the hours, the minutes, and the seconds, but you won't see the frames, but they're actually being recorded. So, and then on the playback, you can also set it to whatever you want. The record time, which counts up basically, or the time, which is just like a 24-hour clock. So that's kind of it for timecode. It's really an advanced topic, and to be honest with you, I haven't used it that much in terms of this. Again, I usually do it manually, syncing up the audio, or if I only have just a few tracks. But if I've done gazillions of takes, I'll use something like Pluralize, which is an awesome piece of software to sync it up with the audio, and not the SMPTE. I have tried it several times with success, depending on your nonlinear editor. I use Premiere Pro, and basically what you can do is turn the two cameras on, let them roll. They're both doing time code, and then you bring them in, and then you basically set them on top of each other, and then you highlight both of them, and then you just say synchronize, and then boop, it'll sync them up perfectly to the time code. But the problem is these things kind of live in their own island. You can't jam sync or feed the SMPTE time code from the camera into the camera, because a lot of professional cameras, what they'll do, from my understand, I've never done it before, but you can go around in the morning and jam sync every single camera. Just take your time code and jam it to each camera, walk around with that one device, and then they're all on the same basically clock. And then like around lunchtime, because they will drift a little bit, after everybody comes back from lunch, they'll go around to each camera and jam them again. So this is a really advanced topic, but that's kind of time code in a nutshell, and kind of recommendations on what I use. All right, the next one down is video snapshot. Again, like I said before, I'm not really going to cover this because I think it's absolutely silly to do editing within the camera. You're much better off, especially being limited to like 4-second clips. Do it in your computer. You'll create much better stories that way. So that is pretty much it for the red menu. All right, the blue menu. Starting at the top, we have Protect Images. You can go ahead and select the images that you want. For instance, just press the Set button. You'll get a little lock on the screen, and you can step through and do more. Now, I will tell you, you can protect them. I don't normally do this because if I format the card, it doesn't matter if they're protected or not. They're going to get erased. So I don't usually protect them, to be honest. This works for both images and video as well. So working our way down, you can do all images in a folder. Folders we'll get to in a minute. You can unprotect, you can do all images on a card, or you can unprotect all on the card. To be honest, again, I'm pretty much the only one in control of the card, so I typically don't have to worry about this. And even if you still have to worry about it if somebody's going to format the card. So let's go to back to menu. Rotate images is pictures related. Erase images, so you can erase every image on the card in the folder, or you can go through and check them. So you can delete individually using the bottom trash can button here, or you can go in the menu and do it this way and select certain ones, and maybe do it more quickly. Again, I kind of shy away from this. Once you got on the card, I hate going through this menu item because I feel like I might screw something up. So I never do it this way. I do clean up sometimes images that are out of focus or takes that weren't very good, and I'll go ahead and delete them. But going in after the fact in the menu, doing it this way, always makes me a little nervous for some reason. I never use it. Let's going back. Print order, skip that. Photo book, we can skip. Raw image per processing, we can skip. Moving on to the next, we've got resize. Can't resize videos, skip. Rating, so you can actually go through and rate. Like if I wanted to rate this one, this particular one, use the up arrow, and you can step through and so that's 4, that's 5 stars. So I've just rated that a 5-star picture or video. Now, you can rate both stills and videos this way. Now I've taken it into Adobe Premiere and looked at the rating metadata, and it doesn't carry through for some reason. So even if you go through and rate all of them, all your best takes that way, maybe one of you guys know, but I've used Premiere and I can't seem to find that meta information, so it's pretty much useless. Slideshow, you can actually do slideshows. I could hit start and it'll play the actual video. There's like a 1 or maybe less than a second delay between when one ends and the next video starts. So you're not going to get this nice seamless effect where if you wanted to display it on the TV and you already had your edit together somehow and you're editing in camera, which I don't really recommend. So you could do the slideshow. It just has that little gap between clips. Image jump with the main dial up here. You can, way it's set by default, you can go every 10. Hit the set button, you can choose, you can just do every 1, which is the same as using the multifunction control. 10, you could do 100, you could do it by date, you could do by folder, and this is the one I sometimes choose. I usually leave it on 10, or sometimes I'll choose display movie files only. So you've done a whole bunch of clips and maybe you're doing behind the scenes photos, but somebody wants to watch all the videos, you hand them the camera, you could put it to this and it'll skip all the photos as they're clicking through on the main dial. So you can do stills and you can do by the rating. And again, the rating, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to work, so I never use it in terms of video. I don't use it on stills either. Starting at the top, we got highlight alert. We're going to be covering this in a lot more detail later. You can enable it or disable it, and basically what you can see here is like we showed before. You can see the snow is lost all detail where it's flashing black basically. So there's no information, no detail. You've totally clipped it out kind of thing, and it's a good warning. It's a good exposure tool, and we'll go into that more later. Autofocus display. We could skip that. Playback grid. You could skip that too because that only applies to stills. You can't put the grid back up on the screen for video. Histogram, you can change between brightness and RGB. We're going to go into much greater detail on this later, but just to show you really quick, if I hit play and I hit info, you'll see that right now I'm selected on RGB. It's a very dark scene, and you can see how especially if you're using like a digital calibration target and you have this at the beginning of the frame, and you pretty much fill the frame. What's really nice about this is you can actually see the color shift between, because we have all neutral colors. There's no color in it basically, so you should see these discrete spikes on the histogram, and if like the red channel is off from the blue channel, you'll know that your color balance is off, for instance. So going back, you can also change it to brightness. So if you hit play, and you can see that it's bright. I usually leave it on brightness unless I'm having color balance type issues. So let's head back. Movie play count. Now this you could set to timecode, and like we discussed earlier in the red menu for the timecode, you can these are interchanged. So if I change it here, it's going to change on the other one. So these menu items are kind of the same thing, so it's kind of redundant. Magnification, I usually set it like at 10, and this is only stills related, so you can zoom way in to see if something's in focus. All right, next one is control over HDMI. You can enable, disable. This is kind of an interesting feature. I really have never tested because I don't have what's called a CEC compliant television. So basically you connect your camera up to the TV through an HDMI cable, and with the TV's remote control, you can control the camera in terms of, like, I think stepping through a slideshow or whatever you want to do with it. I'm not sure because I don't have one of these TVs to test out, unfortunately. And even, it's funny, in the manual it says even if you do have a CEC compliant TV, it may or might not work. One of the things that might be of interest is you can buy a Atomos Ninja 2, an external recorder device you can set on top of your camera, and you can run that cable to the external display recorder, and timecode passes, and you can control from the actual Ninja 2 the camera, like start stop. And I don't know yet because I haven't gotten this in yet to test this out, but I think this will probably need to be enabled in order to do that. So if you wanted to press start and stop recording from the Ninja, it would control the actual camera. That's just my theory. When I do it, maybe I'll update this video when I actually find out. All right, next up is the yellow menu items. First one is select folder. So you can actually create different folders. Like I'll press create folder and it says you want to create 103, and I'm like, yeah, oh, let's create another one, 104. And once you've created the folder, if I were to take a picture right now, it would start inputting into that folder 104. But then you can actually go back and select, well, I want it to be in 100. And that's your normal default folder. So you can actually create and do stuff. I never use this. I guess if you're doing like lots of different scenes and you wanted to put every scene into a particular folder, you could do it that way. It would just be kind of a bother to go to the menu and create it all the time. So I'm not sure where exactly you'd use that. All right, next one down is file renumbering. So you have 3 different types. You got continuous, auto reset, and manual reset. Continuous is basically it just starts at 001 and goes all the way up to almost 10,000. Pretty much all digital cameras do this. They'll get to 10,000, then reset down to 001 again. This is kind of nice. It doesn't matter if you format the card, you power it off, you pull the card out, put it in. The camera knows it's just going to keep shooting until it gets 10,000, reset down to 0. It doesn't matter what card's in there or anything. Auto reset, you can send it automatically to 1 every time you put a new card in. So there might be a situation for that. I typically don't do it that way. Or manual reset. This is something I sometimes do if I know I have 2 different cameras and I won't want them to start at 1. I'll just hit manual set and it'll continuously record. It'll continuously count up to 9,000 again, but it resets you back down to 0. So everything, all the cameras, as long as you put them in different folders, because if you do that and you put them in the same folder, you're going to get duplicates and your operating system is going to warn you, hey, there's already a 001. What would you like to do? Would you want to rename it to 001-2? So definitely think of your folder structure when you do that. All right, before we get to the next one, just format card. I just want to demonstrate. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to protect a few images like this one with the birdhouses on the wall. So I'm going to hit protect. So let's go back, and now we're going to go back to the yellow menu where we were before, and we got format card. So we're going to demonstrate this. There's 2 different types of formatting. Let's talk about that first. There's the quick way, which is if I just went over here and said okay, it would take about maybe a second and a half to format this 32 gig card. It goes really fast. And then if you hit the trash can, it does a low level formatting, which takes about 20 seconds or so. And Canon recommends you do that if your card feels like it's running slow. It's what they say in the manual. I'm not too sure what they mean by slow. Access speed, or maybe it's having problems, or maybe it's just gotten somewhat corrupted. I typically, every time I put the card in the camera, I will do a format. I don't do a low level format, just a regular quick format, and it keeps the card from getting corrupted. But the low level format, from what I understand, actually does a thing called it'll format all the recordable sectors, whatever that means. I'm not sure, but I've never had a problem just doing the regular format. So let's go ahead and hit OK. All right, that maybe took 3 or 4 seconds. So now if we go hit play, we got no images. So even though we protected that one image earlier, it's gone. So let's go ahead back to the menu. Auto power off. I usually set this to 2 minutes, but actually since I'm doing this demonstration, I'm going to leave it at 15. This camera, even if you turn it off with the power switch, turn it back on, you can take a picture within like a half second. It's extremely fast. Same thing if you let it go to sleep and you wake it up, take a picture, it's extremely fast. Some people say, and I've never really proven this, I'll have to run a few more tests on this, but some people say that they don't want the camera to be left on too long because the sensor warms up and the image degrades. I've never seen this, but I'll definitely run some tests on it. But some people say that. I personally just leave it to 2 minutes when I am shooting normally, just because I want to save battery. Right now I'm leaving it at 15 just because I'm running this demo. Next one up is LCD display brightness. So you can crank this up really bright, or you can crank it down to pretty much off. Different trains of thought on this one. What I normally do is I keep it at 4, because if I were to, let's say I'm out on a bright sunny day and I crank it all the way up to 7, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to forget that I cranked it up to 7. I'll come inside and I'll start shooting. I'm like, oh, I'm overexposing. I'll feel like I'm overexposing, and I'll want to maybe stop down the aperture or whatever I'm doing in terms of exposure, which we'll get more into later. But I usually leave it on 4 all the time, and I've just trained my eyes to go outside, inside, because I'm making a lot of decisions on exposure using the display, not only the metering and all the other things that we're going to get to, all the tools that you have at your disposal, but typically 4 for me, it's just personal preference. All right, next one down is LCD off and on button. This is photography related, so we'll skip that one. Time and date we've already done when we set the camera up. English we've already done. GPS. So you can select the internal GPS on the camera, which is really nice unless you're doing scouting, it's just an awesome tool, because you say, hey, I took the picture exactly there. And I've done tests on this thing, and it's extremely accurate. I mean, it's within a few feet. At least when you have all the different satellites. I think you have like 3 to 5 satellites. Once it gets locked on, it does a really good job. Now for video, you can bring in stills and video into like a program like Adobe Lightroom. And it's interesting because you can see the data information for the longitude and latitude in Lightroom for stills, but you can't on video, which is really odd, because there's a program called Media Info. I think it's a freely downloadable program. But if you look at all the meta information embedded into the movie file, it's got longitude and latitude. So I'm not too sure why some of these programs aren't carrying that information over. So it can be a valuable feature for scouting, to where you shot that particular picture and you want to come back to it. You set up basically all you do is just go an external device you can plug in, but since it's already built in internally, which is also mounted up here on the top. I think the way the frame of this is set up, that this top part is not the same material as the rest of the body, and the top part houses, I think, the Wi-Fi antenna and also the GPS antenna as well. So if you're like hiking with it, because you can actually log information, you can actually see the trails. It's kind of beyond the scope of this video, but it could do some really cool things with some of the other programs it comes with, and you can track. But if you're going to do it such a way, it's like any other GPS, if you're backpacking, you're going to need to stick the camera like up on top of your back or on top of your hat or something like that if you get really accurate information as you travel along. But if you're holding it out like this, it should get enough information to accurately lock on to all those different satellites. All right, moving on. Video system, NTSC and PAL. So I don't do anything to broadcast. All I do is stuff to the web, so it really doesn't matter which one it is. Actually, it does matter. And the reason it does matter is, let me demonstrate this to you. If I go to PAL, and I select PAL, and then I go to movie mode, and then I want to change the resolution of the video. And then what you'll notice right here is I've lost my frame rate from 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second. So in terms of slow motion, I've just killed like 10 frames of overcranking. And we'll get a little bit more into slow motion later, but basically, the more frames the better if you can give it to me, especially going to do slow motion at 720. So, I mean, if you're doing stuff to broadcast, you might want to put in the correct one that you're in, depending where you live. But for me, I just choose NTSC because I want to get the best slow motion as I can. So moving down, feature guide. If you haven't done this already, and it gets to be very annoying, let me see if I can demonstrate this really quick. Let's go back to the pictures. And so anytime I hit the Q button and I move around, you're going to get this little nag screen that comes up every time I move it. and it's going to tell you what to do. And after a while, I'm sure you've read all these menus or help menus, and you're done with them because they're get very annoying. So if you go back to menu, you can just go and disable that, and then that goes away. All right, next one is the info button display options. So if we hit the set button, and so basically when you hit the info button, you can cycle around different things like we shown before. You can get rid of things if you don't want them, but it displays the camera setting, which looks like this screen, the level, and then you've got all your detailed information. I particularly like all of them, so I just leave everything set that way, which I don't think is the default way, so you might have to select if you want all of them. Wi-Fi, you can enable or disable. Now what's really cool with the Wi-Fi is you can download an app, which I've done, and I've tested it, and it works really slick. It's a great program for when you're doing pictures. Unfortunately, maybe the time you're viewing this, maybe Canon has updated the firmware, and unfortunately, yeah, you can't take video with this, so that's unfortunate. So really can't even talk about Wi-Fi because it doesn't do video. Sensor cleaning. I would really recommend you enable the sensor cleaning. So when it shakes the, not so much the sensor, I think it's called the low pass filter, the thing's on top of the sensor, and it shakes it, and hopefully it shakes the dust off so you don't get dust particles on your images. I would really recommend doing it because I've had some cameras for years and I've done it this way, and I've been pretty careful about when I interchange my lens. I'm not in a dusty environment, and I've never had to clean my sensor. A good way to test this is shoot at a bright blue sky and then take it into a program like Lightroom and magnify way in, and then just cursor all the way around the screen and see if you see any little dots. And if you do, that means you're going to need to clean your sensor. So another thing on this is there's a clean now and a clean manually. Clean now is just basically the same as auto cleaning. It just does it. But clean manually makes it do it for a longer period of time. So if you're ever running into red hot pixels or white pixels, if you do a lot of astro, like night photography of stars, and you get this, try doing it manually and try doing the camera in different positions. I've heard some people have success pointing the camera downward for some reason and running it multiple times, and then go back and check to see if you still have those red hot pixels, and that might help. Battery info. So, which is kind of neat. You can actually track the battery info for that particular battery. That battery has a serial number, and this only works with Canon batteries, but and you can actually go in, if I press info, and you can actually register the battery. So you can register up to 6 batteries per camera, so you can see how well they're performing. Let's go ahead and just go back to menu, and it shows you the percentage, the shutter count. Shutter count doesn't include videos, and recharge performance. So if you've got multiple batteries and maybe one's like 3 years old and one is just a few months old, and you can actually see the performance. But to be honest, I've had some of these batteries for years, the Canon batteries, and they hold up really well, even on the recharge performance graph. Certification, we can skip that. Custom shooting mode, C1, C2. This is really cool feature for the 6D. So let me demonstrate. So what you can do at the top of the camera, which you can't see right here, there's a C1 and C2. You've probably already seen it already. But if I go to C1, let's say, and I set up for movie mode, and let's see, take the lens cap off, and then let's increase the aperture. As you can see, it's snowing outside again. And what the heck, we're going to decrease the ISO down to 100. So now we're at 50th of a second. Let's bring this up a little bit. Let's make it 10, nice and even. 50th second, F10, and ISO 100. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, and we're going to set this to 720, 60 frames per second. And I'm going to increase this to 1/25th of a second. We're going to get more into the why later. of what I just did here. But basically now I've set this up to record slow motion really well. So now I'm going to go back to menu and I'm going to say register the setting, and I want to register it to C1. And I say OK. So now let's say I go back to M mode where I normally shoot, and let's go back to here, and we're going to set this to all I right here, 50th of a second, ISO 100, and just to make it different, this is 6.3. So right now I'm set up to record full HD at 1080. And let's say it's like, oh, I want to record something in slow motion really quick. So I flip it over to C1, press that button, and then boom, I'm still set up with that exact same setting for slow motion. So you can go back and forth really quick. You can set C2 up to do even something different. Could be changing the picture style from neutral to something else like Cine style that you might have downloaded to the camera. So it's a really, really powerful, cool custom controls. All right, next one down is clear all camera settings. So you can basically set it back to the way you got it out of the box default, except for date and time. It'll keep that. It'll keep your language. It'll keep the firmware, I believe. I've never tested that one. And it'll also keep all your copyright information, so you don't have to re-enter that. So you can pretty much, if you feel like your camera's gotten totally screwed up, you can do that. Copyright information. We're going to kind of skip this one because I'm going to show you a much easier way to do this. So you can display the author and the copyright, or you can go in and actually enter the information. It's kind of a pain in the butt entering it from here, so don't do it here. I'll show you how to do it using the EOS software later. Next one is the firmware. This one is 113. So basically what you do here, if Canon comes around and updates firmware, which they might over the lifespan of this camera, you go to the website, you put it on an SD card, you put it in the SD card into the camera, turn it on, go to this particular page, it'll say, oh, I see something here that's a new firmware, and it'll actually come up with a screen, and then you can step through the firmware update procedure. Just make sure you got a full battery when you do it, because you don't want to turn your camera into a brick, because when you're updating firmware, you don't want it to die in the middle of it. So next one is the orange menus. The first one is exposure. We're going to want to leave this at a third of a stop because we want the most control we can over exposure. Same thing as ISO, most control we can get, third of a stop. This is photography related, photography, and this is also photography. So go back, next one down. This is pretty much all, advanced focusing for photography. If you're a sports related shooter or something like that, you can do some really interesting things with the autofocus in terms of the target coming towards you and stuff like that. But there's really nothing in here for us video-wise. Operations other. So let's say you maybe came from a different camera where this, when you're on the main dial or the jog wheel, you feel like it's backwards. Well, you can go and actually reverse the direction of the main dial and the jog wheel if you like. Next one, this is photography. This one, if you use the lock button, this slider right here, slider switch, which I never use, you can lock certain things out, like the quick dial, which is what I keep calling the jog wheel, or the multi-controller, which is right here, or the main dial, which is up here. I usually just, probably the easiest thing to knock is the jog wheel. So you can lock it out if you want. All right, next one is warnings. So if you're shooting, black and white, for instance, or your white balance has been corrected, you can get warnings. You can set this up however you like. I pretty much leave everything to default. And then this one, you can set up different functions. So you can step through all the different ones and change it to your heart's content. To be honest, I typically leave everything on default. And then now the last one is the green menu. So that's, there's C1 and C2 you have on this camera is awesome. It's a super powerful tool. But you can access things quickly that are in the menu. For instance, like if you want to create something new, you want to register something to your menu. It's like, I always change the beep, for instance. I turn it on and turn it off at weddings, so I'm going to register that. You say, okay. So what happens is, like if I hit, let's say if I get out of the menu and I hit menu again, you'll see now I've got beep I just added. You can add, delete, resort, all these different things. To be honest, I never use this because I get used to the regular main menu area and I don't really ever touch this one. So that's pretty much it for the menu chapter.